In the sultry summer of 1843, the Mississippi River shone like liquid silver under a sweltering sky, its slow current bearing secrets as deep and dark as the swamps along its banks. On a sprawling cotton plantation not far from Natchez, a young white bride named Eleanor Montrose arrived in a carriage of polished mahogany and lace, her skirts rustling like pale water lilies in bloom. She had come to join her husband, Charles, a wealthy planter whose fortune lay in the endless, trembling rows of cotton fields and whose family had held generations in bondage. Eleanor's eyes, though framed in the genteel manners of her upbringing, held a quiet restlessness, as if she sensed before she even crossed the threshold that this life might require more courage than she had ever known. The plantation house was grand, built of white columns and broad verandas, but inside its walls the weight of slavery pressed like the Mississippi summer heat, ever present, suffocating, unavoidable. Eleanor learned quickly how the world worked here, how overseers paced the fields with dusty boots and whips, how the enslaved people bent under the sun, and how the owner's ledger listed human beings next to bales of cotton. She had been raised in a softer life, in a house of drawing rooms and parlors, where morality and propriety mattered above all. But as she moved through her new home, following her husband's proud gait through the corridors, she felt a growing disquiet, an internal tremor, as though her heart already belonged somewhere else. Among the enslaved on the plantation was a man named Jacob, tall, quiet, with hands that knew the muscles of cotton plants and the sky. He was known to the others for his gentle strength and the way he paused sometimes, head tilted, listening to something unsaid, a distant memory, a dream, a whispered promise. Eleanor first saw him one evening on the veranda, silhouetted against the dying gold light, carrying a basin of water to a small group of children who pressed close, their laughter soft as moth wings. In that moment his eyes met hers, and in them she recognized something she could not name, not pity, not ownership, but a fierce, steady dignity. Over the early months of their marriage, Eleanor's unease grew. She became restless in the hush of the drawing room, unsettled by the hush in the fields. In secret she watched Jacob's quiet movements, noticed the way other enslaved people gave him a wide berth, and how children leaned in when he spoke softly. She began to wander the plantation under the pretext of charity, carrying small offerings of food, mending clothes, offering gentle words. In those stolen moments, Eleanor learned Jacob's story in fragments, that he was born on another plantation upriver, that he had been sold here, that he tended the rows at night with a yearning in his chest, one she feared to fully understand. In her solitude, Eleanor wrestled with her conscience. She had been taught that the institution of slavery was normal, ordained, even essential, yet her soul rebelled against that teaching. She felt the corrosive shame of complicity. At night, she lay awake listening to the cicadas, and in the darkness she prayed for a freedom she barely dared to name. She knew, in the core of her being, that freeing Jacob would be dangerous, socially ruinous, legally fraught, morally combustible. But she also knew that she could not ignore what her heart had recognized, that he was not mere property, but a man, and that her life, however gilded, would always be diminished until he was freed. As spring deepened toward summer, Eleanor made a decision quietly, with trembling resolve. She confided in her closest friend, Miss Abigail Sinclair, a cousin from her old home, who had come up for a visit. Abigail was taken aback, first by the audacity, then by the severity of what Eleanor proposed. To free Jacob would not merely be an act of kindness. In Mississippi, manumission was restricted, perilous, and socially suspect. The law loomed over every thought. In 1831, Mississippi had codified strict manumission rules, requiring legislative approval or forcing freed people to leave the state. Still, people did attempt it, in furtive ways, in trembling voices, through deeds drawn in secret rooms or by hidden journeys north. Abigail, though fearful, agreed to help. She would keep Eleanor's secret, she would support her, and she would shield her as much as she could. Eleanor understood that her act might not only break social conventions, but could bring legal peril. Across Mississippi, the number of free black people was small and under increasing pressure. The very idea of a white woman freeing a black man and keeping him near threatened the rigid order that so many in her society upheld. But Eleanor's compassion was fierce. She envisioned a plan. She would arrange for Jacob's purchase of his freedom, perhaps using a middleman or trusted intermediary. She would petition for formal manumission, possibly via legislative petition, or via a deed if she could navigate around the statutes. In the hush of her drawing room, she went over every detail with Abigail, drawing up secret ledgers, hiding money in places no one would suspect, whispering to Jacob only in moonlit recesses of the veranda. Jacob, for his part, was wary. He had endured betrayals, broken promises, the ache of longing too deep for words. He had known other enslaved people who were freed only to be sold into bondage again. He feared that freedom might simply be another form of danger. But there was something about Eleanor's kindness that felt different. Not pity, but recognition. A shared secret, a risk she was willing to take. He observed her late at night, candlelight in her windows, and understood that her resolve came from something deeper than sentimentality. In those moments, something fragile and powerful grew between them, a bond woven of risk and longing, a promise whispered between stolen glances, a shared breath in a world that insisted they remain separate. They began to plan in earnest. Eleanor reached out to a lawyer she trusted, a man who was discreet, who believed in the sanctity of the law more than in the color of skin. He advised her that formal manumission would be difficult, if not impossible, without legislative approval. He warned of the case Hines v. Brazil, in which the Mississippi Supreme Court had refused to honor a manumission deed executed in Ohio, ruling that the owner had circumvented state law and declared both mother and son legally enslaved in Mississippi. But he also told her of the narrow avenues that remained, though difficult. The court sometimes upheld manumissions, especially when the owner showed moral purpose and had the means to support the freed person, or relocate them. Eleanor's heart hammered as she considered the stakes. If her plan failed, Jacob could be sold, punished, or forced away. If she were discovered, her honor, her marriage, her very place in society could be shattered. Yet she believed the risk was worth taking, not just for Jacob, but for herself. She believed that in freeing him she would free more than his body. She would free her conscience, her spirit, her future. As the magnolia blossoms fell and the air thickened with summer heat, they began to enact their plan. Jacob saved secretly, from odd jobs, from whispered arrangements. Eleanor funneled funds from her own private allowance, kept secret from Charles, hidden in letters and tucked in the folds of her dresses. In hushed midnight catalogs, they arranged for Jacob's manumission to be drafted, for documents to be drawn, for witnesses to be found. They met in hidden corners, Jacob near the quarters, Eleanor near the garden shed, and spoke of freedom as though it were a far shore. They might one day reach together. There were nights when Eleanor wept, exhausted by fear and determination both. There were nights when Jacob held her hand, silent, strong, as though grounding her in something beyond what either of them fully understood. She worried about what would happen if Charles discovered. Would he send her away, break her? She worried about social ruin, about disgrace, about animosity from her own family. But she trusted in her conviction, in Jacob's dignity, in their shared, secret dream. And so they moved forward. By the end of the season, word had begun to spread among the enslaved people of the plantation. Something was changing. Something was being planned. Whispers trailed in the quarters. Some smiled, some looked doubtful, some pulled back. They watched Jacob with a new light in their eyes, hope, perhaps, or fear, or simply recognition that this clandestine promise might reshape their world. Eleanor, in her corseted dresses and genteel manners, had become something more than a planter's wife. She was a conspirator in love and justice. And in that moment, under the sweltering Mississippi sky, as the river hummed its slow eternal song, Eleanor and Jacob stood on the edge of a dangerous transformation. What they did next would challenge everything around them: law, society, power, but it would also open the possibility of a future neither had fully dared to dream. Their secret, fragile as a newly fledged bird, waited for the moment to take flight, waited for the moment to take flight. The sweltering summer deepened, and the cotton fields became a theater of invisible tension, each stalk a witness to Eleanor's quiet defiance. She moved through the plantation as if cloaked in invisibility, concealing her purpose behind a veil of manners and the false smiles expected of a planter's wife. Each day, she observed Jacob more closely, noting the subtle pride in his movements, the careful attention with which he spoke to the children, the way he maintained dignity even under the gaze of overseers who sought to remind him of his place. She carried with her a fragile ledger of savings, notes of transactions and legal possibilities, carefully coded in the way women of her class had once kept their own secrets. Abigail remained her confidant, the only soul who fully understood the magnitude of what Eleanor attempted, a quiet revolution enacted through love and moral courage. The process of freeing a human being in Mississippi in 1843 was labyrinthine. The law demanded not only meticulous documentation, but also vigilance against those who might challenge the legitimacy of a manumission. Plantation owners were wary, legislators cautious, and neighbors prone to suspicion. Even a small misstep could result in arrest, fines, or the re-enslavement of the person intended for freedom. Eleanor learned to navigate this system with a mixture of fear and determination. She wrote letters in careful, ornate script, addressed to distant attorneys and sympathetic lawmakers, phrasing requests in terms of legal propriety and moral duty, masking the urgency of her intentions beneath the decorum expected of a white woman of her class. Each word had to be precise, each phrase unassailable, for any mistake could doom both her and Jacob. Jacob, in the meantime, balanced hope with a careful caution honed from years of oppression. He understood that the world beyond the plantation was unpredictable and often cruel. He had heard stories of other men and women who, after securing manumission, were forced to flee, hunted, or recaptured. Freedom was not simply a matter of crossing the threshold. It was a matter of survival, of strategy, and of timing. He began to prepare in subtle ways, learning the terrain of the riverbanks, noting safe passages and hidden routes, quietly collecting small necessities that could support a sudden departure. Eleanor noticed his measured movements, the way he spoke less openly, but with more intent, the way he seemed to weigh every glance and gesture for meaning. Their collaboration became a silent choreography of secrecy, a duet played out against the backdrop of the merciless Mississippi summer died at night, when the plantation grew quiet and the scent of magnolias hung thick in the air. Eleanor and Jacob met in hidden corners of the estate. The garden shed became their clandestine sanctuary, a place where words could be exchanged without oversight, where plans could be drawn, and where the impossible could feel attainable. They spoke of freedom in hushed tones, each sentence carrying weight and urgency. Eleanor described visions of life beyond the river, where Jacob could walk without fear, where he could sleep without the shadow of an overseer's whip, where he could exist as a man and not as property. Jacob spoke cautiously, framing his hopes within the reality he knew. But there was a tenderness in his words, a recognition that Eleanor risked everything for him. Their connection deepened not only through these shared plans, but also through mutual acknowledgement of the courage required to defy an entrenched social order. As the months wore on, whispers of change began to ripple through the quarters. Other enslaved people, those who had known Jacob for years, began to sense the subtle shift in the plantation's atmosphere. There was a new spring in his step, a measured confidence that had been absent before, and those who observed him closely could see that something extraordinary was unfolding. Some offered cautious encouragement, others withheld judgment, wary of drawing attention. The community of enslaved people understood the stakes. If discovered, Jacob could face punishment, and Eleanor could be ostracized, even imprisoned. Yet, amid this tension, there was a fragile hope that blossomed quietly, a belief that justice, however delayed, could be enacted even within the walls of a society built on oppression. Eleanor's interactions with her husband became increasingly strained. Though she maintained outward composure, Charles was a man of routine, deeply entrenched in his worldview, yet he was not unkind. He noticed Eleanor's growing restlessness, her wandering attention, her moments of quiet reflection that did not fit the expected patterns of a newlywed bride. When questioned, Eleanor offered polite evasions, speaking of social obligations, charitable work, or simple fatigue. Charles suspected nothing, for Eleanor's careful demeanor masked the depth of her subversive intent. In the privacy of the drawing room, she continued her secret correspondences, sending letters to attorneys, negotiating with sympathetic intermediaries, and ensuring that every financial transaction remained hidden from prying eyes. Her actions were meticulous, deliberate, and executed under the constant pressure of potential exposure. The legal and social challenges of manumission required Eleanor to think several steps ahead. She sought advice from lawyers familiar with cases of clandestine emancipation, consulting texts that outlined precedents, noting instances where manumission had been granted or denied. The law in Mississippi permitted manumission only under stringent conditions, often requiring legislative approval or relocation of the freed individual outside the state. Eleanor devised contingency plans should formal manumission fail. She would use intermediaries to secure Jacob's freedom in a neighboring state, where the laws were slightly more favorable to emancipated black people. She understood that the process would be slow, fraught with obstacles, but she embraced the complexity as a necessary burden. a testament to the seriousness of her intent and the value she placed on Jacob's life. Jacob's involvement in the planning was equally calculated. He considered each step with careful attention to detail, ensuring that their actions would not arouse suspicion among overseers or neighbors. He observed the rhythms of the plantation, identifying moments when Eleanor could move freely, when documents could be transported, when funds could be shifted without attracting attention. Jacob's understanding of the environment, combined with Eleanor's access to wealth and social privilege, created a delicate synergy that allowed them to navigate the oppressive structures that surrounded them. Each meeting, each exchange was a calculated risk, a moment suspended between hope and peril. Between secrecy and revelation, the psychological weight of their undertaking was immense. Eleanor grappled with fear, guilt, and societal pressure, while Jacob wrestled with uncertainty, the threat of recapture, and the unpredictable nature of freedom. Yet, these burdens forged an extraordinary bond between them, one rooted in mutual respect, shared risk, and a vision of a life beyond the plantation's oppressive walls. Their collaboration became more than a plan for emancipation. It became a testament to human resilience and the capacity for moral courage. In the face of systemic injustice, the stakes could not have been higher, and every small success, every secret of progress, was a victory against the entrenched power of slavery. As summer waned, the preparations for Jacob's manumission approached a critical stage. Documents were drafted, witnesses discreetly enlisted, and funds accumulated in secrecy. Eleanor and Jacob moved with a measured intensity, knowing that the culmination of their efforts could arrive at any moment. The plantation, once a place of routine oppression, had become a theater of quiet defiance, each act of planning a subtle strike against the moral complacency of their society. Friends and confidants, who were trusted with fragments of their plan, offered support and caution in equal measure, understanding the precariousness of the endeavor and the courage required to see it through. The first tangible steps toward emancipation brought a mixture of exhilaration and dread. Eleanor sent letters to distant contacts, carefully worded to avoid raising suspicion, while Jacob prepared for the possibility that the final act might require sudden movement. Every interaction with overseers, neighbors, and family members was measured and precise, for any misstep could unravel months of careful planning. Their lives became a delicate dance between visibility and concealment, between the routine of plantation life and the extraordinary ambition of freeing a human being from bondage. Each day carried the weight of history, morality, and personal risk, and both Eleanor and Jacob felt the enormity of what they were undertaking. Asterisked by the late summer of 1843, a fragile sense of momentum had emerged. Eleanor's careful orchestration of funds, documents, and allies had created a pathway, narrow and treacherous, toward manumission. Jacob's quiet vigilance and strategic foresight had ensured that they could act without immediate detection. The plantation, vast and oppressive, had become the site of a hidden moral struggle, a story of courage and defiance unfolding in the shadows of social hierarchy and legal constraints. Every glance, every whispered conversation, carried the weight of consequence, yet also the promise of something profoundly human, the possibility of freedom, the recognition of dignity, and the affirmation of shared humanity. And so, beneath the heavy air of the Mississippi summer, Eleanor and Jacob continued their delicate work. They had come far, navigating fear, law, and societal expectation. Yet the final steps toward freedom remained ahead. The stakes were higher than ever, the risk palpable, and the potential for discovery constant. But their commitment to one another, their belief in justice, and their courage in the face of systemic oppression propelled them forward. In the quiet moments, as the sun set over the river and the cicadas sang their ceaseless song, they allowed themselves a brief sense of hope, a hope that, against all odds, they might reshape not only their own lives, but also the rigid moral landscape of Mississippi itself. The oppressive heat of the late summer sun seemed to press harder against the land. Yet Eleanor moved with a resolve that was almost unnatural in its persistence. The veranda, where she had first glimpsed Jacob, became both her refuge and her command center, a place where she could survey the plantation without drawing suspicion, and where she could make precise calculations about the timing of their final steps. Every visitor, every passing overseer, every servant who moved across the grounds was a variable in the delicate equation of secrecy she maintained. Eleanor's awareness of the danger was acute. The mere hint of her intentions could provoke scandal, social ruin, and the dismantling of all the careful arrangements she had painstakingly orchestrated. Yet she pressed forward, driven by an inner certainty that Jacob's life and their shared bond demanded action. Her love, tempered by fear and reason, had transformed into a quiet, formidable courage that neither wealth nor status could protect, but that also could not be silenced. Jacob, for his part, had developed an acute understanding of the nuances of plantation life, the subtle rhythms that dictated every movement of those in bondage. He watched the fields with the attention of a man who understood both the physical demands of labor and the ever-present surveillance imposed by masters and overseers. His careful observation allowed him to anticipate moments when he could move unseen or communicate with Eleanor without drawing attention. The strategy extended to every corner of the plantation. The way the rivers bend might obscure a figure from the main road, the timing of meals to avoid crowded spaces, the pattern of visitors who could threaten secrecy. He became almost invisible, a shadow moving within the world that claimed to own him. Yet he was increasingly empowered by the knowledge that freedom was within reach, that Eleanor's tireless planning was not in vain. The legal and logistical complexities of emancipation required not only courage, but ingenuity. Eleanor and Abigail had enlisted the aid of a lawyer in Natchez, who had a reputation for navigating the labyrinthine statutes governing manumission. He advised on the careful wording of deeds, the discreet relocation of funds, and the careful identification of witnesses whose presence would be both credible and invisible to prying eyes. Every document had to withstand scrutiny from officials, who were accustomed to interpreting manumission deeds with suspicion, often in ways that favored the continued bondage of enslaved individuals. Eleanor pored over these instructions late into the night, quill scratching against parchment, balancing her knowledge of legal precedent with the moral urgency that propelled her. Each phrase was measured, each clause meticulously chosen, for the law tolerated no misstep, and any error could nullify months of painstaking preparation. The emotional weight of their endeavor was enormous. Eleanor felt the constant tension between her role as a planner's wife and her commitment to justice. To the outside world, she maintained the composed demeanor expected of women of her class, attending social events, walking through the fields with polite interest, and performing the duties of hospitality with a practiced grace. Yet within her heart, a tempest raged: love, fear, moral urgency, and a relentless desire for Jacob's freedom collided in a constant struggle. She sometimes wept quietly in her room, knowing that each tear was both a release and a testament to the enormity of what they undertook. Jacob's presence, even when fleeting, grounded her, reminding her that courage was not merely a matter of feeling, but of action. Jacob's own internal struggle was equally profound. Years of bondage had instilled a deep sense of caution, a knowledge that freedom, while desired, carried immense risk. He understood that any misstep could mean the loss of not only his own life, but also the fragile possibility Eleanor had engineered on his behalf. He approached their plan with a measured precision, carefully weighing every detail, preparing contingencies, and maintaining an outward appearance that concealed the profound inner movements that now guided him. The contrast between their lives, hers, bounded by privilege but constrained by social expectation, and his, constrained by literal chains, highlighted the extraordinary nature of their collaboration. Together, they moved with a synchronized awareness, the individuals navigating the treacherous terrain of an unjust society with courage, intellect, and an unspoken bond of trust. As autumn approached, the leaves on the magnolia and oak trees began to shift, tinged with the colors of change, and the river's current carried a cooler, more insistent flow. Eleanor knew that time was pressing. The longer she waited, the greater the chance of discovery, and the more difficult the process of manumission would become. She intensified her efforts, meeting Jacob under the guise of routine errands, walking the gardens with him at twilight, and exchanging whispered instructions through coded gestures. They developed a subtle language of glances, movements, and small tokens, so that even if observed, the true meaning of their interaction would remain hidden. Each action was fraught with significance, each encounter a delicate balance between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Their secret world, invisible to all but themselves and a handful of confidants, became the site of profound moral and emotional labor, demanding courage beyond what most of their society could comprehend. Eleanor's commitment also required the management of financial resources with ingenuity. Plantation funds were monitored, yet she had access to personal allowances, gifts, and minor inheritances that could be discreetly allocated to support Jacob's emancipation. She engaged in careful bookkeeping, transferring funds through trusted intermediaries, and ensuring that every transaction remained hidden from the suspicious eyes of overseers and family alike. The financial complexity was daunting. The acquisition of freedom required not only payment for Jacob's legal liberation, but also contingency funds to support his immediate safety, including potential relocation beyond Mississippi's borders. Eleanor's meticulous attention to detail ensured that no part of this delicate operation was left to chance, a reflection of both her moral seriousness and her practical intelligence. Jacob's preparation extended beyond the immediate logistics of emancipation. He began to envision life beyond the plantation in concrete terms, considering safe houses, sympathetic communities, and routes that might allow him to move freely once legally free. This mental mapping of potential futures reflected not only strategic foresight, but also the human need to imagine a life beyond oppression, a life where autonomy was not merely theoretical, but enacted in daily existence. Eleanor's presence in these planning stages was a source of both moral support and practical assistance, providing access to resources and insight into the social and legal systems that Jacob, despite his intelligence, could not navigate alone. Their collaboration became a profound example of partnership, mutual respect, and shared courage in the face of systemic injustice. The plantation itself began to take on a different character as autumn settled in. Enslaved people noted subtle shifts, Eleanor's increased presence in the quarters, her attentiveness to Jacob's work, and the coded signals that passed between them suggested that something extraordinary was underway. Whispers circulated cautiously, creating an undercurrent of hope and speculation among those who had long endured oppression. Jacob's demeanor reflected this subtle change, his movements marked by a new confidence tempered by careful vigilance. The community of enslaved individuals began to recognize the potential for moral courage and strategic ingenuity within the confines of a society structured around control and subjugation. Eleanor's actions, though invisible to most, catalyzed a quiet moral awakening, demonstrating that individual agency could challenge entrenched systems even in the most oppressive environments. The moral and emotional stakes of their endeavor were heightened by the awareness that any misstep could have catastrophic consequences. Eleanor understood that discovery could result in social ostracism, legal penalties, and the disruption of her family's reputation. Jacob understood that exposure could mean the loss of freedom, physical punishment, or forced relocation. These risks demanded constant vigilance, meticulous planning, and unwavering dedication. The process of navigating such perilous terrain required not only intellect and courage, but also a profound trust between them, an understanding that the success of their plan depended on their ability to act in unison, with precision and with absolute discretion. Their bond, forged in secrecy and shared purpose, became a source of strength that enabled them to persevere despite the ever-present danger. As the days shortened and the first cool breezes of autumn swept across the plantation, Eleanor and Jacob reached a critical phase of their planning. The deeds were nearly complete, witnesses quietly enlisted, and the transfer of funds securely arranged. Each step was taken with meticulous care, ensuring that the legal, financial, and logistical elements aligned in a manner that would maximize the likelihood of success. The anticipation of freedom imbued each action with urgency and significance, while the constant awareness of potential discovery lent a heightened intensity to even the simplest gestures. The plantation, with its grand columns and oppressive history, had become the stage for an extraordinary act of moral courage, a quiet rebellion against the systemic cruelty that had defined the lives of those enslaved for generations. In the midst of these preparations, Eleanor reflected on the broader implications of their actions. She recognized that freeing Jacob was not merely an act of personal morality or romantic devotion. It was a statement about the capacity for justice and compassion within a society structured on inequality. Her courage challenged the assumptions of her peers, the complacency of the legal system, and the moral blindness of a social order that normalized bondage. For Jacob, emancipation represented not only the liberation of his body, but the affirmation of his humanity, a recognition that his life was not defined by property laws or social expectation, but by the inherent dignity of a free person. Together, their endeavors symbolized the transformative potential of individual action in the face of systemic oppression, a testament to the enduring power of conscience, courage, and mutual respect. As the humid days of autumn deepened into a crisp, golden November, the plantation seemed to exhale a different air, one heavy with anticipation, secrecy, and subtle tension. Eleanor moved with a sense of quiet urgency that belied her genteel composure. Each morning, she rose before dawn, dressing with deliberate care. Her mind occupied not with social duties or husbandly attentions, but with the precise steps that would soon transform Jacob's life. She memorized the timing of patrols and the movements of her husband and the overseers, creating a mental map that guided her actions and minimized risk. Every encounter with visitors, every call to distant correspondence, was executed with careful precision, for one slip could unravel months of meticulous planning and expose both her and Jacob to danger. Eleanor's awareness of the stakes sharpened her senses, heightened her courage, and forged a resolve that became as steady as the Mississippi's flow. Jacob, too, adjusted to the approaching climax of their plan. He moved through the fields with a quiet, almost meditative vigilance, balancing the need to appear dutiful with the imperative to remain alert. Each step he took was calculated, each glance weighed for potential consequences. He began to store small items that might support his escape, stowing them carefully in hidden pockets and corners, mindful that any discovery could provoke suspicion. At night, he and Eleanor convened in the shadows of the veranda or within the secluded garden shed, exchanging critical upgrades and reassessing contingencies. Their meetings, though brief, were charged with tension and intimacy. Each word carried layers of meaning, each gesture signaled urgency. The unspoken connection between them deepened, a bond forged through shared risk, mutual trust, and the shared dream of a life beyond bondage. The legal arrangements, meanwhile, approached their final form. Eleanor, working with her discreet legal allies, reviewed the manumission documents again and again, scrutinizing each clause for potential vulnerabilities. In Mississippi, the law was rigid, and the path to freedom required either legislative approval or a cleverly constructed deed that could withstand challenge. She consulted her lawyer, who emphasized that the success of such efforts depended not only on the legal text, but also on careful orchestration of witnesses and the timing of submission. Eleanor absorbed these instructions with meticulous attention, recognizing that the documents alone were insufficient. They had to be paired with strategy, secrecy, and the unwavering moral commitment that defined her purpose. The enormity of the task pressed on her, yet she persisted, her determination sharpened by the knowledge that every day brought both opportunity and danger. Jacob understood that emancipation, once formalized, would not automatically guarantee safety or security. The social realities of Mississippi were harsh, and newly freed black people were often targets of hostility, legal restrictions, and even violence. He considered escape routes, potential allies in neighboring states, and safe havens that could provide temporary refuge if necessary. These preparations reflected not only strategic foresight, but also an acute awareness of the precarious nature of freedom in a slave society. Eleanor's involvement in these discussions was critical. Her social standing provided access to resources. Her wealth enabled the creation of contingency funds, and her knowledge of local customs and legal frameworks offered guidance that Jacob, despite his intelligence, could not fully command on his own. Together, they moved with precision and care, aware that the success of their plan depended as much on coordination and strategy as it did on courage. The emotional dimension of their endeavor grew more intense as the moment of emancipation approached. Eleanor wrestled with fear, guilt, and hope, oscillating between moments of despair and moments of exhilaration. Each interaction with Jacob carried immense weight. A shared glance, a fleeting touch, a whispered instruction all became imbued with significance, a testament to their shared journey through peril and risk. Jacob, too, experienced a complex interplay of hope and apprehension. He balanced the excitement of imminent freedom with the caution instilled by years of oppression, understanding that even minor mistakes could provoke grave consequences. Their mutual dependence intensified, creating a profound psychological and emotional synergy that became the cornerstone of their efforts. Meanwhile, the plantation itself bore silent witness to the unfolding drama. Enslaved workers observed subtle shifts in Jacob's demeanor, noting his increasing confidence and the discreet signals exchanged with Eleanor. Whispers circulated cautiously, a mixture of hope, curiosity, and speculation permeating the quarters. Eleanor's movements were also noted by those around her, though her outward composure concealed the full scope of her intentions. Friends and confidants, including Abigail, remained vigilant, providing support and counsel while maintaining strict secrecy. The plantation, a microcosm of a society structured on domination and control, had become the setting for a quiet moral rebellion where courage, ingenuity, and compassion converged to challenge entrenched systems of oppression. The logistical challenges of securing manumission reached a critical juncture. Eleanor and her lawyer coordinated the submission of deeds, ensuring that witnesses were present, funds properly allocated, and documents meticulously prepared. Each step was executed with discretion, balancing urgency with caution. The legal framework required that deeds be witnessed by credible parties, submitted according to procedural norms, and recorded in ways that minimized potential interference or challenge. Eleanor's attention to detail reflected both her strategic acumen and her deep moral conviction, as she recognized that the technical success of their efforts was inseparable from the ethical imperative that had motivated them. The painstaking care with which she approached each step underscored the gravity of their endeavor and the profound consequences that hung in the balance. Jacob's preparation extended to practical matters as well. He considered the realities of living as a free man in a society still hostile to black autonomy, planning for housing, sustenance, and personal safety. Eleanor facilitated these preparations, providing both financial support and strategic guidance. Their collaboration was a study in interdependence. Eleanor's privilege and resources complemented Jacob's knowledge and vigilance, creating a synergy that increased the likelihood of success. Their shared commitment transformed what might have been a purely legal or logistical exercise into a deeply human act of partnership, empathy, and courage. In this collaboration, the lines between social status and moral action blurred, revealing the potential for human connection to transcend entrenched hierarchies. As November progressed, the tension of the operation reached its peak. Eleanor and Jacob's secret communications, careful planning, and coordinated efforts had brought them to the threshold of emancipation. Yet each day carried the potential for discovery, betrayal, or unforeseen complication. The uncertainty of timing, the vigilance required to avoid detection, and the moral weight of the endeavor created a constant psychological pressure. Yet within this pressure, both Eleanor and Jacob found clarity and purpose. Their bond, strengthened by months of shared risk, became a source of resilience, enabling them to navigate fear, uncertainty, and the immense complexity of their undertaking. The broader societal context in which they acted cannot be understated. Mississippi in the 1840s was a place where slavery was legally codified, socially normalized, and morally rationalized by powerful interests. Laws governing manumission were restrictive, public sentiment largely hostile to the notion of freeing enslaved people, and the cultural expectation for women of Eleanor's class was to conform, not challenge. The audacity of Eleanor's plan, therefore, lay not merely in its legal or logistical dimensions, but in its defiance of deeply ingrained social norms. Her actions represented a moral challenge to a society built on oppression, demonstrating that individual conscience could assert itself, even against overwhelming systemic forces. In these final weeks before emancipation, Eleanor and Jacob's collaboration became increasingly fluid and intuitive. Each understood the rhythms, dangers, and opportunities inherent in their environment, and each adapted to the evolving circumstances with strategic foresight. Their efforts were characterized by meticulous attention to detail, emotional resilience, and an unwavering commitment to justice. The success of their plan depended not only on skill and courage, but also on the profound trust they had cultivated, a trust that allowed them to navigate the treacherous social, legal, and physical terrain that defined life in Mississippi. The culmination of months of planning, secrecy, and shared moral purpose approached with a tension that was both exhilarating and terrifying, a delicate balance of hope and risk poised on the edge of history. The first chill of winter began to settle over the Mississippi Delta, dusting the edges of the cotton fields with a faint, brittle frost that reflected the growing urgency in Eleanor's mind. Each day became a careful choreography of observation, timing, and subtle communication. She moved through the plantation with the poise of a bride, yet every gesture, every smile, concealed a mind working furiously to orchestrate the final stages of Jacob's freedom. The risk of exposure had never been higher. Charles, absorbed in business and social matters, remained unaware of the quiet revolution unfolding beneath the genteel surface of his household. Yet Eleanor knew it was only a matter of time before the scrutiny of the world around her could intrude. Every meeting with Jacob, every discreet transfer of funds, every coded gesture carried consequences that extended far beyond their own lives. Jacob's awareness of the stakes had sharpened to an almost palpable intensity. He understood that emancipation was more than a legal transaction. It was an act that required careful navigation of human behavior, law, and social expectation. his observations of the overseers, of the rhythm of the fields, and of Eleanor's interactions with her husband became instruments of strategy. He began to anticipate movements and predict outcomes, assessing risk and timing their secret communications with precision. The months of preparation had trained both of them in a subtle, almost imperceptible language of glances, gestures, and positioning. Their collaboration was a delicate balance, each step dependent on trust, intuition, and an unspoken understanding of what the other required to move safely toward their shared goal. The final legal steps were approached with extraordinary care. Eleanor had prepared the manumission deeds, arranged witnesses who were sympathetic yet discreet, and consulted with a lawyer experienced in navigating Mississippi's restrictive statutes. In a society where white women were expected to conform to social norms, her actions were revolutionary. The documents themselves were meticulously drafted, each clause crafted to minimize potential challenges while adhering to the narrow path the law permitted. Eleanor reviewed them repeatedly, understanding that the smallest error or inconsistency could render the effort null and leave Jacob exposed. Every letter she sent, every transaction she arranged, was executed with precision, a testament to her combination of intelligence, courage, and moral conviction. Jacob, for his part, prepared for the practical realities of life after emancipation. He considered where he might live, how he could sustain himself, and what routes offered the safest passage should relocation become necessary. The months of clandestine planning had not only fortified his strategic thinking, but also cultivated a profound sense of hope tempered by caution. Each decision was informed by a lifetime of constraint and the recognition that freedom, while morally imperative, was not without peril. Eleanor provided resources, guidance, and moral support, creating a partnership that blended privilege, strategy, and courage in a way that defied the rigid hierarchy of the plantation society. The emotional intensity of the final stage of their preparation was immense. Eleanor found herself oscillating between exhilaration and fear, hope and apprehension. Each encounter with Jacob carried layers of meaning, with every glance and gesture signaling both affection and urgency. The weight of secrecy was constant, pressing on Eleanor's conscience and sense of responsibility. She understood that her actions defied not only the law, but also the deeply entrenched social and moral norms of Mississippi society. Jacob, too, experienced a complex blend of emotions, anticipation, wariness, and a cautious optimism grounded in months of meticulous preparation. Their mutual reliance, cultivated through months of careful planning and shared risk, became a source of profound strength as they approached the moment when theory would become action. The plantation itself seemed to sense the tension. The enslaved community, long attuned to subtle shifts in behavior and mood, noticed changes in Jacob's demeanor and Eleanor's increasing attention to the affairs of the fields and quarters. Whispers circulated quietly, conveying a mixture of hope and cautious speculation. The presence of Abigail and other trusted confidants provided additional layers of support and oversight, ensuring that the final stages of planning could proceed with as much safety as possible. These observers, while few, formed an invisible network of moral and practical reinforcement, amplifying the careful orchestration that Eleanor and Jacob had cultivated over the months. The legal process reached a crucial moment as the deeds for manumission were finalized and witnesses secured. Eleanor and her lawyer ensured that each procedural requirement was met, minimizing the potential for interference or challenge. The delicate balance between visibility and discretion was maintained with painstaking care. Eleanor's knowledge of social and legal norms, combined with Jacob's strategic understanding of the plantation's operations, allowed them to navigate this complex environment with remarkable precision. Their collaboration became a model of human ingenuity and moral courage, a testament to the capacity of individuals to challenge entrenched systems of injustice, even when such challenges carried profound personal risk. As the deadline approached, both Eleanor and Jacob confronted the full weight of the stakes. For Eleanor, exposure could mean scandal, loss of social standing, and potential legal repercussions. For Jacob, failure could mean continued bondage, physical punishment, or forced separation. These risks imbued every action with heightened significance, demanding vigilance, discipline, and unwavering focus. Yet within this pressure, both found a source of empowerment. Their shared commitment to justice and to one another provided a moral compass that guided each decision and strengthened their resolve to see the plan through to its conclusion. The emotional dimensions of their endeavor were compounded by the broader societal context. Mississippi in the 1840s was a region defined by entrenched slavery, strict social hierarchies, and a legal system designed to preserve the subjugation of black people. Eleanor's actions directly challenged these norms, defying expectations of her gender, social class, and racial hierarchy. Her courage was extraordinary not merely because of the legal complexity, but because it represented a moral defiance of the system itself. Jacob's courage was equally remarkable. Grounded in a lifetime of oppression, yet guided by a clear vision of freedom and dignity. Together, their endeavor became both a personal and symbolic act, a moment in which individual morality intersected with the broader currents of history. The final preparations involved careful coordination of timing, movement, and communication. Eleanor and Jacob rehearsed the steps required to complete the manumission, ensuring that funds, documents, and witnesses would align seamlessly. Each participant in the process, from the lawyer to the discreet intermediaries, played a crucial role in maintaining secrecy and precision. The intricate choreography required acute attention to detail, an understanding of human behavior, and an unwavering commitment to the shared goal. Every contingency was considered, every risk evaluated, and every possible outcome weighed. The enormity of the task did not diminish. If anything, it intensified as the moment of action drew nearer. Throughout these final weeks, Eleanor and Jacob's bond deepened in ways that transcended the practical necessities of planning. The shared experience of navigating fear, secrecy, and moral urgency created a profound intimacy, a mutual understanding that was forged in the crucible of danger. They drew strength from one another, sustaining hope and determination even when confronted by the omnipresent threat of discovery or failure. Their connection, rooted in shared purpose and moral conviction, exemplified the human capacity for courage, resilience, and empathy. In a society structured to divide and oppress, they found a space of partnership, solidarity, and profound ethical action. As December approached, the final arrangements were nearly complete. The deeds had been signed, witnesses coordinated, funds secured, and contingency plans established. Eleanor and Jacob had reached the threshold of emancipation, poised on the brink of a profound transformation that would alter both of their lives. The Mississippi River, reflecting the fading light of the winter sun, seemed to mirror the currents of change flowing through their lives, carrying with it the promise of freedom, dignity, and human connection. The months of careful preparation, courage, and moral conviction were about to culminate in a decisive moment, one that would test their resilience, ingenuity, and shared determination. The first days of December brought a brittle clarity to the Mississippi air, each dawn crisp and laden with the scent of damp earth and cold river mist. Eleanor moved through the plantation with the quiet intensity of a woman carrying a burden that was also a mission of love. The final preparations for Jacob's freedom required a combination of courage, precision, and timing that had been months in the making. Each morning she rose before the household stirred, reviewing documents, memorizing the schedules of those who could inadvertently compromise their plan, and quietly coordinating the movement of funds that had been hidden in plain sight. The risk of discovery was omnipresent. One misstep could lead to scandal, arrest, or the re-enslavement of Jacob, yet Eleanor pressed forward, her resolve deepened by the moral imperative that had guided her. Since the first spark of realization that she could act on behalf of justice and love, Jacob, for his part, had refined his own rhythm, moving through the plantation with a careful vigilance that masked a mind constantly calculating and anticipating. He monitored the overseers, noted the timing of patrols, and observed the habits of neighboring planters who might inadvertently interfere. His preparation extended beyond the legal and logistical, encompassing the practicalities of survival in a society still hostile to the freedom of black people. He mentally rehearsed potential escape routes, safe havens, and contingencies, preparing himself for the day when he would move from secrecy to autonomy. Each day of waiting was a test of patience and trust, yet the invisible thread linking him to Eleanor provided strength, purpose, and the confidence to continue. The legal documents had been finalized, witnesses discreetly identified, and funds securely positioned to facilitate the manumission. Eleanor had worked tirelessly to ensure that each element adhered to the letter of Mississippi law, while exploiting the narrow avenues that permitted emancipation. The process was delicate. The deeds had to withstand scrutiny. The witnesses had to remain discreet yet credible, and any error could nullify the effort. Eleanor's meticulous attention to detail reflected both her intelligence and the depth of her moral conviction. She understood that legal success alone was insufficient. Execution required a seamless alignment of timing, secrecy, and human discretion. The orchestration of these elements became a testament to her courage, foresight, and unwavering commitment to justice. Jacob's preparation extended to the emotional terrain of emancipation. He understood that freedom was not simply a legal status, but an existential transformation that demanded readiness, courage, and resilience. The months of clandestine planning had fortified his mind and spirit, cultivating a sense of agency that had been denied for most of his life. Each secret meeting with Eleanor, each coded gesture, and each shared glance reinforced the trust that had grown between them. Their bond, forged under the pressure of secrecy and risk, became a source of strength, grounding both of them as they approached the precipice of liberation. Within this fragile trust, they found the moral and emotional fortitude necessary to confront the dangers and uncertainties that awaited. The social dynamics of the plantation played an unspoken role in the final stages of planning. Enslaved workers noticed subtle changes in Jacob's behavior and Eleanor's movements, interpreting them through the lens of experience, intuition, and hope. Whispers circulated cautiously among the quarters, a mixture of speculation, encouragement, and quiet admiration for the audacity and courage on display. Abigail and other trusted confidants remained vigilant, offering advice, oversight, and practical support while maintaining strict secrecy. The plantation, which had long functioned as a mechanism of control and hierarchy, had become the setting for a moral and emotional upheaval. A quiet insurgency conducted not with force, but with courage, strategy, and human empathy. The psychological tension of these final days was intense. Eleanor grappled with fear and anticipation, constantly balancing the need for discretion with the urgency of action. Each decision carried consequences that extended beyond herself, potentially affecting Jacob's life, the welfare of their household, and the perception of their social community. Jacob, too, bore the weight of anticipation, aware that the culmination of their efforts would demand not only courage, but precise execution. Under conditions of extreme uncertainty, the shared awareness of risk intensified their mutual reliance, transforming their collaboration into a profound partnership in which every choice, gesture, and plan was calibrated to ensure success and safety. Asterisk as the day of final submission approached, the subtle choreography of movement, communication, and observation became increasingly intricate. Eleanor and Jacob rehearsed their actions mentally and physically, ensuring that the transfer of documents, the coordination of funds, and the presence of witnesses would occur with seamless precision. They had anticipated potential obstacles, devised contingencies, and prepared for both expected and unexpected challenges. The months of preparation, marked by secrecy, trust, and moral courage, converged in a delicate moment poised on the threshold between oppression and freedom. Every step carried weight, every gesture had consequence, and every second was imbued with the intensity of possibility. The legal and social constraints surrounding manumission were formidable. Mississippi law in 1843 placed severe restrictions on emancipation, often requiring legislative approval or relocation to avoid conflict with local statutes. Eleanor's careful navigation of these constraints reflected both her intellectual acumen and her commitment to moral responsibility. She had engaged legal counsel, coordinated witnesses, and executed discreet financial transactions to ensure that the manumission could proceed without interference. Jacob, relying on his intimate knowledge of the plantation and the surrounding communities, contributed practical insight, reinforcing the strategic rigor that defined their efforts. Together, they operated within a highly constrained system, exploiting narrow legal avenues, while maintaining the secrecy necessary to safeguard both their lives and the success of the endeavor. The emotional stakes were equally profound. Eleanor and Jacob had invested months of risk, hope, and moral labor in this pursuit. Their shared experience of secret meetings, coded gestures, careful coordination had created a bond that transcended conventional relationships. Within the plantation system, love, trust, and courage interwove, forming a foundation of resilience that enabled them to confront the enormity of their task. Each small success, whether the discreet transfer of funds, the signing of a document, or the safe execution of a minor movement, reinforced their confidence and strengthened the fragile scaffolding of hope, upon which the ultimate act of liberation would rest. In addition to legal and logistical preparation, practical contingencies were addressed with meticulous care. Jacob considered the realities of immediate life post-emancipation, routes to safety, temporary shelter, sustenance, and protection against those who might exploit the vulnerability of a newly free black man. Eleanor facilitated these preparations, providing both resources and guidance, ensuring that freedom would be sustainable, not merely symbolic. Their collaboration extended beyond the abstract ideal of justice to the concrete realities of survival, reflecting a profound awareness that liberation required both moral courage and practical foresight. The meticulous planning of these details underscored the seriousness of their undertaking and the depth of their commitment to each other. As the final week before submission approached, the tension between secrecy and execution became increasingly pronounced. Eleanor's movements through the plantation were carefully timed, her interactions with family, neighbors, and overseers calibrated to avoid suspicion. Jacob balanced labor, observation, and preparation, ensuring that all practical and logistical needs were met without drawing attention. The intricate coordination of these elements required constant vigilance, foresight, and emotional resilience. Their daily lives, outwardly ordinary, were suffused with extraordinary significance, each moment carrying the weight of history, morality, and personal destiny. The plantation, a symbol of oppression, had become the theater of courage, moral defiance, and the pursuit of human dignity. In the final days, Eleanor and Jacob's collaboration had achieved a level of intuitive synchronization that transcended conscious planning. They moved as one through a world of danger, constraint, and societal expectation, each aware of the other's needs, fears, and actions. Their bond, forged through months of secrecy, shared risk, and moral conviction, provided the foundation for the decisive act of liberation that awaited. The culmination of their efforts, approaching with both urgency and precision, represented not only the realization of personal freedom, but also a profound moral statement that courage, intelligence, and human connection could challenge even the most entrenched systems of oppression. The dawn of the decisive day arrived with an almost surreal stillness. The Mississippi air was cold and sharp, carrying the faint scent of frost along the river banks and a quiet tension that seemed to echo through the cotton fields. Eleanor moved with the precision of one who had rehearsed every gesture, every glance, every moment of the unfolding act hundreds of times in her mind. Her heart beat steadily beneath the layers of silk and lace, steady yet acutely aware of the stakes. Months of preparation, risk, and moral courage converged in this singular morning, a moment poised between the brutal weight of the past and the fragile promise of a liberated future. She carried with her the manumission documents, discreetly folded, the signatures of witnesses carefully secured, and the means to ensure that Jacob's emancipation would be recognized and unassailable. Jacob, already awake before the sun touched the horizon, moved quietly through the shadows, his senses attuned to every sound, every movement around the plantation. The careful rhythm of his preparation, the hiding of small essentials, the mental mapping of escape routes, the rehearsing of contingencies had reached its peak. Months of vigilance, fear, and hope had strengthened him, cultivating an inner calm and clarity that belied the peril of the situation. He understood that emancipation was not simply the signing of papers, but the beginning of a profound transformation, one that would redefine every aspect of his existence. The weight of freedom, both exhilarating and terrifying, settled on him, tempered by trust in Eleanor, whose courage had made this day possible. The legal procedures were executed with a precision that mirrored Eleanor's relentless planning. The witnesses, discreet yet credible, had arrived under the guise of routine social visits, carefully instructed to maintain both appearance and discretion. The documents were presented, signed, and recorded in a manner that adhered strictly to the letter of Mississippi law, leaving no room for technical challenge. Eleanor's meticulous attention to detail, the tireless counsel of her legal allies, and the discreet support network she had cultivated over months all converged in this moment, creating a seamless pathway to freedom. Each stroke of the quill, each careful placement of a signature, resonated with the immense moral and emotional significance of the act, marking a triumph of conscience and courage against the rigid structures of oppression. Jacob, when the final signatures were secured, felt the first tangible weight of freedom settle on him. The shackles of law, custom, and human cruelty that had bound his body and spirit were lifted in an instant. Yet the gravity of what he now possessed, a legal claim to life, liberty, and agency, was profound. He looked to Eleanor, their eyes meeting in a moment that transcended words, conveying gratitude, relief, and an unspoken recognition of the courage and risk that had made this possible. In that gaze, all the months of clandestine meetings, secret signals, and painstaking planning were distilled into a single affirmation: love, strategy, and moral courage could prevail. even against the seemingly insurmountable weight of systemic oppression. The plantation, silent witness to the extraordinary act unfolding within its grandiose yet oppressive architecture, seemed almost to hold its breath. Overseers moved through the fields, oblivious to the quiet moral revolution that had just occurred. Workers continued their labor, some catching fleeting glimpses of Jacob, now moving with a confidence and poise that reflected his new status. Whispers, carefully contained, traveled among the enslaved community, carrying the story of liberation like a seed that promised possibility and hope. Eleanor and Jacob had not only executed a legal act, but had also enacted a symbolic rebellion, demonstrating that the structures of power, while formidable, were not impermeable to courage, ingenuity, and human compassion. The immediate aftermath of emancipation required vigilance. Jacob, though legally free, still navigated a society hostile to black autonomy. Eleanor ensured that contingency plans were in place, offering resources, guidance, and practical assistance to safeguard him from potential reprisals. They moved cautiously, aware that freedom, while now a legal reality, carried risks that demanded continued awareness and strategic thought. Yet, in these careful measures, the joy and relief of emancipation were unmistakable. Jacob could now make choices about his life, labor, and associations in a way that had been impossible for so long. Each step forward, while fraught with caution, was infused with a profound sense of dignity and agency that had been denied for years. Eleanor's role in this transformation remained both heroic and understated. In a society that prized appearances, her composure, grace, and social standing provided the shield behind which the act of liberation had been orchestrated. She had navigated legal complexities, orchestrated secret communications, and marshaled resources with extraordinary intelligence and courage. Her actions defied the expectations of her gender, social class, and the rigid moral code of a slave-holding society. Yet she acted with neither arrogance nor desire for recognition. Her bravery was quiet but formidable, a testament to the capacity of individual conscience to confront systemic injustice with precision, courage, and care. In freeing Jacob, Eleanor had enacted an ethical imperative that reverberated beyond their personal lives, offering a subtle yet powerful challenge to the moral failures of her society. Jacob, in turn, embodied the resilience, intelligence, and strength of those who had endured bondage yet retained the capacity for hope and strategic action. His years of observation, careful planning, and disciplined patience culminated in this singular act of liberation. Beyond the legal recognition of freedom, he now possessed the psychological and emotional liberty to assert his dignity, pursue personal agency, and imagine a future unconstrained by the ownership of others. The months of collaboration with Eleanor, conducted in secrecy and under threat of discovery, revealed not only the power of human connection, but also the capacity of oppressed individuals to navigate and transform the systems that sought to contain them. The act of emancipation resonated beyond the individuals directly involved. It became a quiet signal to the broader enslaved community that agency, courage, and moral action could prevail against oppression. Whispers of hope, cautiously disseminated, nurtured the imagination of others, offering the possibility that liberation was not only a legal concept, but a practical reality attainable through strategy, intelligence, and courage. Eleanor and Jacob's story, while carefully shielded from the scrutiny of the broader white society, radiated a subtle moral force that challenged entrenched assumptions about power, hierarchy, and human capability. In the days that followed, Jacob began the tentative steps of establishing his new life. Eleanor facilitated connections to sympathetic communities, resources for sustenance, and pathways that could offer temporary safety. Each decision was informed by months of preparation, careful observation, and strategic planning. Freedom, once a distant hope, was now an active condition requiring attention, foresight, and continued prudence. Yet within the complexity and uncertainty of these early days, there was a profound exhilaration, a recognition that human dignity, resilience, and collaboration could create tangible transformation even in the face of systemic oppression.